Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I am installing the NSX IAB Delete. And if you're not familiar with this, it's a brand new product that Science of Speed just released in order to get rid of basically the butterfly valves in the intake manifold. If you're not familiar, the butterfly valves are being held in by staked screws that regularly back out for a lot of people. Mine are fine. I inspected them with a scope. However, if you know me, I am a bit of a worry wart, so it really piqued my interest, especially for the price, and I'll get into that in a second, where, you know, I'd rather install this and not have to worry about the screws backing out ever again. So the kit itself is $150, $149 to be precise, and they provide you with this nicely machined billet aluminum delete, which basically replaces the valves. So in the intake manifold, there's sandwiched this piece from the OEM, but there's valves in between here. So this is going to take that place. It's going to delete it completely. They do provide you with two new gaskets for above and below this piece right here, and then they supply you with some crush washers and some spacers, a plug for one of the vacuum lines, and a new gasket for the evap tube. So the only thing, when I looked through the instructions, the only thing they don't provide you is intake manifold gaskets, meaning gaskets from the manifold to the head. So if you do need to replace those, you're gonna have to buy those ahead of time. I decided not to buy those ahead of time because they're $80 a piece. So I'm going to just see how mine are, and if they're fine, then I'm just going to leave them. But if they're not, then I'm just going to pause the process and order some gaskets. According to SOS, this should take around 4 hours to 4 hours and 15 minutes to install. And so I'm going to take you on a step-by-step as usual to install this. So let's get started. Okay, the first step is to remove the fuel cap to relieve pressure. The next step is to remove the intake manifold top cover, the actual intake manifold cover, and the two injector covers. These injector covers are going to be 8mm. Okay, next step is going to be to remove the front ignition coil cover. Okay, next step is to remove this 10mm holding in the throttle cable bracket. And then we're going to pop off these two covers right here. So this is the reason why you need to remove the front coil cover, is to be able to remove this plastic piece. Okay, the next step is to remove this fuel line connected to the fuel rail. So we already hopefully relieved pressure by disconnecting the fuel cap. So you're going to remove this. This is a 17mm head, and there's going to be two crush washers inside that you're going to want to replace. So these are crush washers that SOS has provided replacements for, and so you're going to want to, again, get a rag here to soak up any fuel. There shouldn't be too much, so don't be too afraid, but of course you'll want to work in a well ventilated area for this. So a little bit of fuel leaked out. It'll evaporate fairly quickly. So here's the head, and you got one crush washer on top of the banjo and one crush washer on the bottom of the banjo. So just keep an eye out for that. So here's one crush washer, And I don't think it's in the instructions, but it looks like you're probably going to have to remove this also in order to move the fuel pipe out of the way. So lift up on that, and there's one more crush washer in here. So that's very important that you do not double up on 2 crush washers when you're reinstalling everything. So you want to make sure that you remove that. So again, here's the other washer. All right, I'm gonna soak up the fuel. Fuel evaporates very quickly, so there's some that drip down, but it's gone already now. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this fuel line up and just wrap it aside. Okay, next you're gonna have to remove the top cover of your intake. If you have a stock intake, obviously my intake is already removed. And then you're gonna wanna remove this coupler. And then after that, we're going to get to the EGR valve and remove those 2 10mm bolts. And so that valve pipe is what SOS gives you the gasket replacement for. So that diamond shaped gasket is going to replace the gasket that comes off of that piece. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this pipe right now and then disconnect the 2 10mm head bolts. In order to get this tube out of this, get the hard line out of the intake coupler, I removed the 10mm holding this tube in to give me a little bit more room. I was worried that this piece is starting to split already. It's kind of hard rubber, so you can see here that's starting to split. So I was concerned about that. So just keep an eye out for that. We're going to go ahead and remove the M6 bolts 10mm head off of the EGR bracket, EGR tube into the EGR. Next, we're going to disconnect the throttle cable from the bracket, which is right here, these 2 nuts on this threaded part of the throttle cable. So you're just going to back off one of these nuts and then pull it out from the bracket, and then pull the throttle cable out from this connector as well. So what you want to do is back out this nut all the way past this non-threaded area back here, and disconnect the cable from this holder right here, and that way you can push the throttle cable all the way back and up in order to release it from the bracket like that. Next step is to release the various connectors connected to the throttle body. So that's going to be one right here, one right here, and this one back here. That is connected, held onto the throttle body at this point. So those 3 should be it. If not, I will show you if there's any more. Next, we have to disconnect the connectors to the idle air control valve, which is this guy right here. And there is a connector on the very bottom right there. There's a gray connector. Release that one. And then the IACV, we're going to disconnect this connector. All right, disconnecting the idle air control valve was not fun. I'm currently sitting in my engine bay, and in order to get to it, I reach down up top like here with my thumb pressed down on the connector button, and then with my other hand, I went in and pried from the top of the plug and pushed downwards in order to get it off. Mine was kind of stuck on there, so your results may vary. Yours might be easy to come off, but mine was kind of a pain. Next, we're going to remove the brake booster line, which I believe is this one, and the PCV from the intake manifold. So we disconnect it here and disconnect it right here. Okay, with the brake booster and the PCV tube removed from the intake manifold, we're going to disconnect the throttle body with these 4 nuts on the studs. Disconnect it from the intake manifold. All right, these are 12mm and there's 4 of them. Okay, I'm going to disconnect this bracket holding on the throttle body. I'm going to pull off the throttle body and carefully set it aside if I can. We need to disconnect the throttle cable. Okay, I got the throttle body off. In order to remove it this far, I had to disconnect that breather to the rear valve cover right there. But it's set aside carefully. Next, we're going to disconnect the various 3.5 millimeter vacuum hoses. So this one going to the EGR, and then these 5 going to the emissions control device. So these 5 are numbered. So the first one, I will tell you which number is which when I take them off, but the first one is the one on the top with number 1 on it. The second one right there, and number 4 up front right here. And number 3 on the bottom back here. And then finally number 5 bottom in the front. So just set those aside. You should leave this bracket, leave this on the intake manifold. Just disconnect these and disconnect these 5 right here. Leave it connected to this device. Just set it aside. Next, we will want to remove the 2 grounding wires. So one right here, this guy, and then the other right there. Just placing this screw back where it came from so I can remember, keep track of it. So next you're going to want to detach this EGR connector, disconnect this bracket holding the connector, and then disconnect all of the injectors. Okay, this is going to be hard to show you guys, so I disconnected one injector just to show you guys what we're dealing with. So this spring around the plug is what keeps it on the actual injector. And there's no real easy way to do it. I just grabbed a pick, and you kind of have to just pick at this, the paper clip looking part of it, and pull it out so you can basically pull it off. So you have to basically put your pick in there, pry it out, and then you'll be able to pull this out of the injector. So I'm gonna have to do that on all of these in order to unplug each injector. Okay, I know you guys will probably struggle with this as much as I did, so just to give you a visual of what I did, the injector goes down like this. So what I ended up doing was usually grab this kind of pick, and I put it in this corner, and I twist it in and just pry. So obviously I did this when it was on the injector, so it's easier to get a little bit more leverage, but I put it in there, pry it out, and then pull it along this edge and pop out the edge, or I stuck it along this edge back here and just pried it out like that. So I went around the back and pushed left on this piece like this, and then pulled it out like that. And once you have one side out, you can just use your pick, follow it along the other side, and pop out the other side. And then you're just going to want to reset this for when you install it back. So just reset it like that for when you install it, and then you'll just clip in and push in and stay in. Okay, next we're going to disconnect the 2 connectors to the ignition control module. Set those aside. Next, we're going to disconnect the cylinder / crankshaft position sensor. This will allow this harness to move away from the intake manifold freely. Probably going to disconnect this just to get this out of the way as well. Make sure your battery is disconnected. This is your power to your alternator, which has 12-volt constant. Okay, I don't think it's in the instructions, but you're going to want to remove these 4 nuts holding the injector harness to the fuel rail. It's not in the instructions, but I'm pretty sure you're going to want to remove these 4 bolts holding in the injector wire harness to the fuel rail. Hold this out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and unplug this alternator as well. That way you have a little bit more clearance when we pull up the intake manifold. Alright, I'm going to disconnect this as well. Alright, this is a fuel line, so you got to be careful that you don't drop too much fuel, but of course it'll dry out pretty quickly. Okay, for you 00 to 05 guys, it says here the air injection pump located in the rear of the engine bay is in the way of the IAB valve vacuum port. Remove the 2 Phillips screws to release the IAB valve bracket. Use a magnet to extract the screws. Carefully push the IAB valve bracket slightly forward to allow the port to clear the air injection pump. Okay, in order to remove the intake manifold now, we're supposed to remove the 4 outer nuts. So one right there, and there's 2 more on the opposing sides, and 4 inner hex bolts. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 in there. So those 4 nuts and 4 bolts, we need to remove those in order to remove the intake manifold. Okay, these 8 fasteners are 12mm heads. And I'm using a breaker bar to break all of them loose. All right, there's a step I skipped earlier on, which was SOS only detailed as remove all coolant hoses connected to the intake manifold. So I didn't know how many that was. I didn't know which one of these. I can't see what underneath. I don't know how far down the intake manifold goes, so I don't know which ones were connected. So I got to the point where I was able to disconnect the intake manifold and lift it up in order to figure out which hoses are connected to it. So it turns out this hose right here, the right side of the idle air control valve, I believe. Right there, I disconnected already. It's connected to the bottom part of this hard line, the smaller line. Has coolant in it, so just be aware. Probably coolant came gushing out, but it wasn't a ton. It seemed like a lot at first. But it's probably just like a cup to between 1 to 2 cups of coolant. So what I would suggest is to have a bottle, which I have right here. It's kind of hard to see, it's not focusing. A bottle, and I drilled a hole in the side and I connected a strap to it. And so whenever you release that hose, you can direct it right directly into the bottle. I didn't do that. Luckily I had a pan underneath, but all of it went down to the ground on the pan. But just be aware of that. Okay, and we're also going to go ahead and remove that coolant line going straight down. So obviously I'm going to vacuum up everything. I'm going to clean up these ports really quick, and then I'm going to probably just cover them with tape. I don't want to make the mistake of putting a towel in there and then just accidentally forgetting the towel in there. Here's a quick look at the EGR gasket that you're going to replace, that SOS gives you a replacement for. And then that's about it. So now you just have to work on the intake manifold on a bench and replace the parts that SOS gives you. With the intake manifold off of the vehicle, I'm going to flip it over. It looks like it's flat enough that I can flip it over. So I did loop some coolant lines and plug this fuel line. Although if there's fuel in there, that's probably gonna leak fuel out of this banjo fitting. But just be aware that some fluid could come out. And the reason you want to flip it over is because you're going to want to remove these various screws that hold these three parts together. So there's three parts. There's this top part, the middle piece, and the bottom. This middle piece is what we're going to be replacing with the SOS part. And of course, with your injector still in here like I have, you want to be very careful that you don't mess up the tips of the injectors. Because we are going to probably go in here and clean up the surface, mating surface a little bit, as well as the surfaces. Once we remove all this stuff, I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning. So just be aware, if you want to be extra safe, you can remove your injectors. But I may or may not do that. We'll see. Also, fuel did come out of the banjo bolt just a little bit. You can see, well, it's dried up, but there used to be a little puddle right there. Not too much fuel. So just be aware of that. All right, these are all going to be 12mm heads. Okay, so just a nut and bolt check. There are two sizes of bolts. These three at the higher side, or these five I should say, 3 on this side, 2 on this side are the longer bolts. And the shorter bolts are going to be 1, 2, 3 right here on this side, and these two are going to be a nut and a washer. So we're going to go ahead and pry. It looks like there's a little pry spot right here. There's a pry spot on this side as well. Looks like it comes apart pretty easily. Very nice looking in here. Cool little magnesium logo right there. Looks like it's going to need a decent amount of cleaning up. So here's the moment of truth. I have checked my screws via bore scope previously, but I'm going to go ahead and give them a jiggle test right now. The side to side jiggle, which is the whole rod moving. Looks like all mine are good. No problems. Okay, at this point we're going to do a really quick parts check. So all of this is what SOS provides. This is of course the EGR valve gasket, which is going to be for this guy right here. So you're going to want to clean this off carefully. Make sure you don't get any debris as you clean it off in this hole. So I'll probably stuff it with a paper towel or something and then clean off the surface. And then these crush washers are for the fuel rail banjo bolt, top and bottom. And these washers are for all of the bolts holding this assembly together. I guess you're supposed to replace them with the washers they provide you. And this black plug right here is for your butterfly valves. So you're supposed to plug this one up as you remove this whole assembly. You're gonna plug this up, but for me, I don't want just a tube hanging out down there. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a plug. So I got this from, I believe, Harbor Freight. That's what I'm using to plug up some of these holes right now. But this should work good and look a lot cleaner. So I'm going to carefully tilt this. So here you go. There's the plug right there. So next, all you need to do is just keep pulling this thing apart. So it's a little bit oily. All this oil is from blow-by, from your PCV system, redirecting oil back into your intake for burning. So we're gonna have to go ahead and clean this part off, and I'm gonna go ahead and clean all this too. Okay, with the surfaces cleaned, and I did clean out the ports a little bit and the bottom piece cleaned, you're going to go ahead and grab your gaskets. And the order it's going to go in is the divided gasket goes between the intake manifold and the chamber valve, or the SOS part. And then the open gasket goes between the bottom and the centerpiece. And of course, you're going to replace all washers with new washers the SOS provides. And these are going to be torqued to 16 foot-pounds. Quick note is that SOS does say to wipe down their gaskets. Specifically, they say wipe down gaskets to remove debris from manufacturing. So after wiping it down a little bit, what I think it means is there's these little bits of flashing. I don't know if you can see it, like on this edge right here, this piece that came off. So that's probably what they want you to wipe off. So I'm going to do that off, not over my intake manifold, but just look out for those. Okay, so this gasket only goes on one way. Well, it can go on, yeah, only goes on one way. Since these bolt holes are staggered. So now we're going to install the IAB Delete, which only goes on one way as well. So it's on, and it looks like it fits excellently, as what you would expect. And then you're going to put on the other gasket. And the other gasket goes on. And we will put on the last piece. All right. And I'm going to remove all the washers off of the old bolts. Make sure you don't drop them in your intake manifold. Okay, and then we're going to insert the 5 long bolts first. And get them started. And there's a nut and a washer, new washer on this side, nut and a washer on this side, and then the 3 shorter bolts. And SOS does mention that you may need to shift the gasket towards the center a little bit to get the holes to line up, but mine seem to line up perfectly fine. And these are torqued to 16 foot-pounds. Once again, be careful of your injectors. Okay, lastly, with everything torqued, I'm going to clean off this mating surface for the EGR valve. Mine just has a little bit of gasket left over on it. EGR valve mating surface is clean, and we have a look at the SOS IAB Delete fully installed. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that all your injectors are clean, that you did not bend the tips of them or break the tips of them. Now you go ahead, you're ready to install everything back in the vehicle. Okay, and before you install the intake manifold, you're going to want to clean off this old gasket off of the EGR. I'm going to try to do this carefully and try to take it off all in one piece if I can. Okay, it's time to put the intake manifold back in. And so go ahead and drop it in. Next, with the intake manifold on and the mating surface of the EGR pipe cleaned off, we're going to slide in this gasket, and the bolts are going to be these, 2 of these. All right, so I just attached these threaded studs onto the fuel injector harness. So the fuel injector harness goes over the aluminum part of the fuel rail, and then you just tighten these on top, these four. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug this in while it's right staring at me, and then I'm gonna plug in all the injectors. Okay, injectors are plugged in. I'm going to plug in the alternator. Feed this ground wire. Okay, before you connect the alternator back on the power post, connect this plug back onto this bracket right here. Then, of course, put the alternator lead on, making sure your power is still disconnected to your battery. Okay, that's snugged on. Put the boot on. This area looks to be almost done besides all these covers that we did first, so we're working in reverse order. Okay, next is to bolt down the intake manifold. So we're gonna go ahead and put in 4 bolts in the inner sections. And then 4 nuts in the far corners. Okay, and all of these are torqued to 16 foot-pounds. All right, continuing in the reverse operation, we are going to connect the ignition control module. And then I reattach this ground right here. All right, next we're going to reattach this bracket for the EGR connector. Then we're going to connect the 2 halves and reattach it to the bracket. And then we're going to attach the rest of these 3.5 millimeter vacuum hoses. So this one right here. Okay, next we're going to install the throttle body. Grab your 4 nuts and attach them to the studs. The throttle body is also torqued to 16 foot-pounds. And if you remove this off the throttle body, make sure you add that one back on. All right, we're going to attach the brake booster. Next, we're going to connect everything all up in this area. So it's going to be kind of hard to show you with my camera on the tripod, but we're going to connect this connector going to the, I think that's IACV. We're going to connect this hose down to the bottom of this hard line right here. We're going to connect the other part of the hose, which I have a union fitting, which I use to keep the coolant from spilling on my workbench. But so this side of the hose is going to connect down to this nipple that I have covered right here. And then I'm going to connect this breather part of this this breather right here back to the intake mount, back to the valve cover. And then going to connect 2 connectors, this connector right here and this connector to this wire that comes off this side of the intake manifold. So there's this wire right here with this connector. So those 2, I mean, they're not the same shape, so they're the only 2 connectors that need to be connected down here. And then of course this bracket is going to attach back right here, and then we'll go ahead and attach these 5 hoses after all that's done. Okay, so we're gonna attach these hoses, and on the side with the 3, it goes 1, 2, 3 from top to bottom, and the side with the 2 ports, it goes 4, 5 top to bottom. So we're going to start with number 3 on the back side, then 2, then 1, and then 5 on the front bottom, and then 4 last but not least. Now I'm leaving this one loose for now because I know I needed more play to get this into the intake coupler. So I'm gonna connect this into the throttle body. Okay, with the throttle cable fully loose, not mounted yet, we're going to put the post of this, the end of the throttle cable through the hole, and then make sure the line wraps through this channel. Then we can go ahead and pull the rest of the throttle cable up all the way into place like so. Okay, we're going to reinstall the intake tube next. So we're going to slide this on. All right, and I just realized I did not have a hose clamp on this originally, so I'm going to put one on. This is an aftermarket clamp, but it'll do. And then connect this breather. All right, lastly, on this side of the engine, we will put this in its final place. And that completes this side of the engine besides the intake, which I'm not going to install yet, but that should be pretty straightforward for you guys. Last thing we need to do is do the fuel return. So again, we're going to put the washers, use the washers that SOS gave you, one on the bottom, then the banjo bolt, then one on top, and then the nut. And then we're going to install the rest of the covers and everything on this side. Okay, next we're going to attach the fuel back. So again, use the brand new crush washers that SOS provides you. Put one down, the banjo, one on top of the banjo, then the nut. And this is torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to connect this fuel pipe back to the other side of the fuel rail. And then we'll connect this breather. Okay, next we're going to put this cover back on underneath the coil cover. I'm going to put the nuts and bolts on the coil cover. Okay, then we'll install the short screw right here, short bolt right here, in this fuel rail bracket. Okay, next is to put this cover on, and this bracket goes on top, and we're going to use the long bolt that we have left. Okay, now all that's left is are the covers, the fuel injector covers and the manifold cover. Okay, and so you're going to use these small special bolts for the fuel injector covers. The hex head, they are 8mm. All right, I forgot to press record on the last part, which is installing the intake manifold cover back on, but that's just for the gold bolts, and then the top cover is these two Allen screws. So that completes the installation. I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, or you can reach out to me on Instagram as well. Last thing, I would fill up some coolant that you lost. I don't think you would need to burp the entire system. You can if you want to, but it's just a little bit of air that got in, so I'm sure it could probably burp itself through the reservoir. But just add a little bit of coolant in to make up for what you lost during the install. But overall, pretty simple install. You just have to be familiar with working with a fuel line and a couple of coolant lines, but not bad. SOS quotes again 4 hours and 25 minutes or 4 hours and 15 minutes for install. I would say if you're a novice, 4 to 6 hours. I probably did it in probably 5 hours or so. So you can't even notice that it's there. You can see a little bit, a hint of fresh aluminum right there. That's it. But I'll leave driving impressions in a future video once I get my car up and running. Right now my transmission is still missing. So once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.